I ruined my son's $2 million deal with a handful of goats, a retired circus llama, and a stapler that could punch through anything, especially his patience. By sunset the day the tire company sent men in polished shoes to inspect the property, they were chased off by reporters, a choir of peacocks, and a county clerk holding a folder thicker than their contract. My son mouthed a single word at me across the gravel, "Why?" while the escrow officer calmly explained the penalty clause he had forgotten to read to the end. That was the middle of it. The beginning and the end were worse for him, and much better for every child who now feeds carrots to the mini zebra that snores like a chainsaw behind my barn. My name was, and still is, Willa May Arnett. I turned 69 in May, the same day the first peach of the year blushed on the south tree, and the same day I found the listing. He didn't even warn me. That's what burned hottest, not the price tag or the idea of steel buildings breathing where our cottonwoods had breathed for half a century, but the quiet, slippery way my own son swept me out of the story. I was at the kitchen table with my chipped blue coffee cup, the one my husband bought me from an old roadside stand where the man measured time by the shade of the sky instead of a clock, and I watched our 10-year-old desktop wheeze itself awake. When the listing loaded, my husband's ranch, my home, had been flattened into a sales brochure, a drone photo of beige soup with a caption that announced 42 underutilized acres in a cooperative municipality. They had even photoshopped out the windmill. You'd think spinning metal would be easy to leave in a photograph, but no, they erased everything that looked like a memory and left only bleached possibility. Seller, Mark Arnett. My son. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. A text came back, at work. Later. At work meant an open-plan office with glass walls and decorative plants that looked like they had their own assistants, and people saying words like scale and roadmap, as if a family could be scheduled into a calendar invite. Mark had worked 10 jobs since he was 18, good jobs and not so good jobs, and I'd bragged about every single one to whoever would listen, but the last 2 years had hardened him into someone who checked his watch in the middle of hugs. He had married Mira, who was all kindness for other people's dogs and all sharp corners for me, and the two of them lived in a place with a balcony they never stepped out on because views are best when framed by glass. When he finally picked up, he didn't bother with hello. "You saw the listing," he said. "You didn't tell me," I said. "I was going to," he tried, and we both heard the lie in the space between us. "Mom, the taxes are a problem. The upkeep." "It's your father's ranch," I said, because that's what it was, even if the deed sat in my name like an old friend holding my hand. "It's an asset," he said in a tone that made me want to wash his mouth out with well water. "And it will be a bigger asset when we sell." I found a buyer. $2 million cash. A tire company, Mom. They're bringing jobs. We're already in contract. Inspections in 3 days. It's happening. 3 days, I repeated. I was going to come by Sunday and explain. That must have been a very long explanation, I said, and hung up. At 69, I had earned the right to hang up first. I walked outside and the windmill creaked like an old elbow. The stray goat I'd been feeding, Sheriff, named for his eagerness to butt anything that misbehaved, including the mailman's bike, chewed at my robe and looked up as if to ask whether I was going to do something or stand there like a fence post. The ranch lay gold and quiet. The pepper tree made shade like it was writing poetry. My husband's hat still hung on the nail in the tack room, the sweatband gone white from 100 July afternoons, and when I touched it I felt more certain than I had when I was 19 and said yes to a man whose laugh could mend anything except a broken axle. Mark didn't know I had a plan. He had heard me talk about the mini zoo the way you hear a far-off train, nice to notice, not close enough to move your coffee cup. But I had lists. I had donors and pledges and a scouting report from a retired zookeeper who knew which animals could visit without turning a school group into an emergency drill. I had 3 rescue goats promised and a miniature donkey named Scone who ate bananas like a gentleman. I had the school superintendent's word that if I could make it official, 2 buses of children would roll down our dirt road twice a month. All I needed was time. He had given me 3 days. I boiled more water because thinking is better done with a hot cup in your hands. Then I opened the drawer where the papers slept, the deed in my name, the will, The letter from the bank we saved because you never throw away a paper that says paid in full. The note my husband had lodged under the silverware the winter he realized he was sicker than he would say out loud. I looked at the deed, then at the calendar with a baby llama wearing a ridiculous hat and the box for Wednesday circled, because that's when the county board met. I didn't have time to write a speech, but I knew how to hold a pen. The city clerk's office was cold enough to keep fish. I took a number and waited behind a man in a suit who smelled like new furniture. When the woman called me up, I slid her a stack of forms filled in with my careful cursive, home-based business license for an educational animal sanctuary, special event permit for community open days with animal experiences, a copy of the letter from the elementary school promising field trips, and photographs of a donkey that technically hadn't set foot on my land yet, but whose spirit had already unpacked and started braying. I signed as the owner of record. The owner of record, not the child of record. My husband had left the ranch to me outright, and my name sat in the courthouse like an oak. Then I went to the county and filed a conservation easement. I learned the phrase from a woman named Ms. Darling, yes, that was her name, who ran a little foundation whose money was small and whose backbone was iron. Educational use only, I wrote with a flourish. No industrial development. Protect wildlife corridors. Restrict night lighting to preserve dark skies. I turned our land into a promise that would outlive me. We stapled, we stamped, we walked out blinking in the bright noon as if we had stolen something, and in a way we had, time. While the ink still dried, the retired zookeeper loosed a squadron of volunteers with clipboards and headlamps. They walked the pasture like detectives. Before dusk, we had flagged 2 burrowing owl nests and, in the cool rafters of the old barn, a small colony of long-eared bats like delicate commas hung between the rough beams. The county liked owls and loved bats. I liked anything that made a tire factory decide it could love another piece of land more. When the tire company sent their inspector in a sedan with a logo that looked expensive to draw, I met him at the gate. "Watch your step," I said. "We found owls." "Owls?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "And bats," I added. "The Fox family will only show off if you behave." He returned to his car with a face like a wrinkled contract. That afternoon, Mark called. "What did you do?" he said without hello. "I made coffee for your inspector," I said. "He prefers it black." "Mom, please. This is serious. If this deal collapses, I'm on the hook. For liquidated damages in the amount of 10%, I said. Page 13. Did you think I couldn't read? I raised you reading. He went very quiet. It's funny how quiet sounds the same on a phone as it does in a pasture. I could hear the wind in both. The next morning I hung flyers at the library, the feed store, the post office, the diner where you have to know the code to make the coffee machine produce anything but hot brown water. "Pop-up barn day, come meet your neighborhood goats, and a very polite donkey," they said. I called the local paper and said the words corporation, grandmother, and owls in that order. A reporter arrived before lunch with a camera and questions. I didn't give him anger, I gave him story. By noon the internet had decided I was either a saint or a nuisance. I didn't bother reading the comments because I prefer the opinions of animals and cashiers. On the 3rd morning, 3 black SUVs slid down our driveway in a row like they were late to a funeral. Out stepped men in ties and a woman with alert eyes and a navy dress, and behind them, Dusty, because he had never once respected a speed limit sign, my son. He looked as if he had swallowed something square. Trina from down the road pulled up in her truck so neatly it looked rehearsed, a crate in the back with a piglet inside wearing a bow because Trina believed bows made every situation easier to explain. By then there were children everywhere like confetti, clutching carrots and giggling at scone, who engaged with public life the way a minor royal must, with patience, appetite, and sudden opinions about bananas. The navy-dressed woman asked if we could speak privately. "You already are," I said, gesturing to the town. She explained, in gentle words with iron behind them, that the contract contemplated unencumbered land. I explained, in calm words with a storm behind them, that the land had been encumbered with promises, public and recorded, the kind you couldn't bulldoze without bulldozing the courthouse first. A deputy friend of mine wandered over with a lemonade. The county clerk waved from under a pop-up tent and signed my special event permit with a flourish. The zookeeper spoke 3 sentences about bats that made the corporate men hold their breath. The woman called my son to her side and said, in a voice that made even the goats pause, that he had made representations that were inconsistent with reality and that the clause for failure to close was not decorative. $200,000. 10% of $2 million is a very different number when it's leaving your bank instead of arriving. He looked at me like a boy who had fallen off a horse and forgotten how the ground worked. It did not feel good. Revenge rarely feels good in the moment. It felt like lifting something heavy and setting it down on the right shelf. Still, I saw the gasp in his chest, the one he didn't want anyone to hear. I turned away and showed a 5-year-old how to hold a carrot for a goat so your fingers survive the transaction. You keep your hands flat. You keep your promises flatter. The SUVs left. The town stayed. The paper ran a photo of a girl with freckles offering a carrot to a donkey whose eyes were the color of tea. The caption said something about community and perseverance, which are big words you can hold in your mouth if you chew slowly. Mark called that night so late the stars had rolled halfway home. I can't pay this, he said in a voice I recognized from skinned knees and report cards. We stretched for the condo. Myra's taste in furniture is specific. College funds. We thought this money was the bridge. You built your bridge on my house, I said. You did it without telling the person who lives in the house. You are not paying for a penalty. You are paying for a lesson. I thought, he started and stopped. I thought you'd be proud of me for being decisive. Decisive is different from considerate, I said. Decisive without considerate is just loud. He didn't come the next day or the next. I got up and fed animals and taught children and signed another form at the clerk's office and reminded Sheriff that the mail carrier's ankles were innocent. The mini-zoo didn't wait for my feelings to settle. Animals have to eat. Manure doesn't shovel itself. Parents who drive 2 towns over with toddlers expect a show, and by show I mean a long, quiet field with fences kept in good repair and staff who remember where the hand-washing station is. He showed up on a Thursday morning with eyes like he had read a book with too many numbers but not enough commas. We need to talk, he said, staying outside the fence like the grass might stain his shoes. I'm busy, I said, and demonstrated for a 2nd grader how to angle a carrot so a goat's soft lips could catch it without catching her thumb. The girl laughed in a way that made 2 birds answer. You went through with it, he said, staring at the painted sign above the gate. Willa May's Mini Zoo and Rescue. I did, I said. You gave me a deadline. That wasn't a deadline. Oh, honey, I said, surprised to hear the endearment escape. When you put a date on a thing and attach money to it, you made a deadline whether you like it or not. He told me then, not all at once and not neatly, about the app that had flamed out with the investor's patience and the friend who had convinced him that land beat stock options because land doesn't go to zero overnight, and the condo association that could fine a grown man more than a week's salary because he had planted tomatoes on a balcony. He told me Myra's mother had called every other morning with advice that sounded like marching orders. He admitted he skimmed contracts because when the numbers felt good his hands itched to sign. He said he hadn't realized how the thing I loved wasn't the buildings, but the air between them. You never told me, he said finally. About the easement. About the license. About all of this. You never asked, I said. It came out softer than I expected. He looked like someone learning a language by ear. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. No, I said. I hate what you did. That's different. If I hated you, I would have sold the place for $1 and sent you the receipt. He almost laughed, then didn't. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands like a boy who just discovered tiredness. What do I do? You pay the penalty, I said. You learn how to read page 13 before page 1. You come on Saturdays and learn how to sweep a barn aisle without turning dust into a prayer. You guide tours until your voice can turn a goat's rumen into a song. You apologize to your daughter for trying to sell her grandfather's story before she learned it. And you stop calling the past an asset like it's a trinket on a shelf. I can't pay it, he said again, but softer this time, like he knew I could hear the part of the sentence he didn't say, without losing the life I built. I can, I said. He stared because math had never included me before. Your father left me something I never touched. I was waiting for a reason bigger than a roof. This is bigger. I'll wire it to escrow, and you will pay me back with 2% interest because I am not a bank. I am a mother, and the interest is there to remind you love isn't free. If you miss a payment, I will send Trina with the pig and leave him in your kitchen. Please don't, he said with real terror, picturing hoof prints on white rugs. Then pay on time, I said. He nodded, and then kept nodding because sometimes agreement is emotion before it becomes a belief. We signed what needed signing. I wired what needed wiring. He transferred what needed transferring. The escrow officer, who had the patience of a saint and the handwriting of a librarian, sent emails in a tone that made complicated things sound like laundry instructions. When it was done, he stood in the doorway of my kitchen as if the room might expire if he went outside. I thought you'd kick me out of your life, he said. I considered it, I said. But then who would teach you the difference between a shovel and a pitchfork? He showed up on the first Saturday at 6 in the morning in new boots that looked like the idea of boots, and by 8 he was wearing his father's instead, because there are some things you cannot buy. The way leather learns a man's stride, the way a handle remembers a hand. He mucked stalls. He learned that donkeys watch you work and judge in silence. He found out goats will make you look foolish if you don't close the latch exactly so. He guided a tour of third graders and said the word room in twice and made it sound like a secret club. It would be a neater story if he transformed overnight, if his second Saturday found him bear hugging the windmill and apologizing to the pepper tree, but people turn like seasons, not like switches. His neck still tightened when he talked about money. His thumb still hovered over his phone when Mira texted. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he put it face down and picked up a broom. I said nothing about either choice. I gave him a list instead: fill water, check gates, greet the 9 o'clock group, and make the shy kid feel like a king. The tire company called twice in those months. The second time a man with a voice that wanted to be charming asked if there was a number that would make me consider selling. There is not, I said, and meant it. Numbers solve bills. They do not solve grief or dawn or a child's laughter at a goat sneeze. There were setbacks. A neighbor complained to the county about odors, which made me laugh, and then bake a cake and carry it to her porch along with a tour schedule and a voucher for her grandsons to feed carrots to Scone. She ended up donating 2 benches and a shade sail because people who say the word odor are often simply lamenting the absence of lemon bars. A storm peeled a panel off the roof of the old barn, and we spent a Tuesday afternoon in a choreography of ladders, ropes, and improvised tarps that made me feel 30 until I tried to stand the next morning. A teenager graffitied the side of the tool shed with a message about city folks, which was funny because he had written it with nervous spelling from the wrong county. Sheriff chased him as far as the gate and then stood there chewing, looking pleased with the principle of the thing. There were kindnesses almost too bright to look at directly. The mayor brought a check the size of a door and enough red tape to gift wrap 3 birthdays. The school counselor called to ask if I had a quiet corner and half an hour for a child who needed the hush that happens when you brush a rabbit. The credit union manager came by on his lunch break because his grandson had drawn a picture of Scone and he wanted to make sure the years were accurate. MS. Darling showed up with a crate of milkweed and a thermos of tea, and we stood at the fence sipping, looking at the place my husband had loved, and I said his name out loud 3 times until the air did not catch on it anymore. Mira came once, in linen the color of fog, holding a latte like a shield. She looked around, unimpressed and wary, as if the ground might rise up and ask her to volunteer. It's cute, she said. It's work, I said. She smiled the way you smile at someone who thinks a hobby is a career. Mark can't keep spending Saturdays here. He has responsibilities. So do we, I said, nodding at the queue of children and the bucket that needed filling and the list tacked to the post. He promised a year. He will keep his promises. There is a cancellation clause if his heart breaks in half, but not if his schedule does. She stared like she was memorizing my face for later. You're very sure of yourself. No, I said. But I am sure of the difference between a good day and a wasted one. She left before the goat yoga class, which is mostly yoga for goats and a laughing chaos for humans. I watched her go with a kind of relief a storm cloud might feel when wind chooses another valley. On a Tuesday in July, the windmill began to complain in an urgent new voice. The squeak had turned into a grind, and the grind into a sound I could feel in my teeth. I stood at the base with a wrench and 3 guesses. "Hand me the socket," Mark called from the ladder, and for one sharp moment I saw his father, not because of a resemblance in the jaw or the hair, but because of the posture of care, the willingness to climb, to stand where the sky asks more of you than the ground does. We fixed it with a strip of inner tube and optimism. He laughed, wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist, and the laugh was his when he was 7 and had built a dam in the creek with rocks and stubbornness. "Did you want me to fail?" he asked out of nowhere, still clinging to the side of the sky. "I wanted you to learn," I said. "Sometimes failure is the teacher. Sometimes someone else is." He stared at me for a beat, and then nodded like the decision to be a better man had not yet finished downloading, but was moving along. The tire company did not give up without leaving a fingerprint. A consultant filed a citizen complaint about traffic. I recognized the email style because I had worked 30 years at the county in a job that taught me every way a person can try to smuggle greed through a door labeled concern. I mailed a copy of our car count study to the planning board and invited the consultant to the Saturday morning when we host 3 families of children with sensory sensitivities. He didn't come. The complaint evaporated like a promise made at a podium. A second consultant asked to test our soil for educational purposes. I said, "We already learned what we needed to learn." He left a card with a logo that looked like an expensive opinion, and I used it to shim a wobbly table. We had a scare when a llama spit exactly at the moment a television crew filmed B-roll for a feel-good segment, but the anchor laughed and wiped his sleeve with dignity and declared us authentic. We added a hand-lettered sign, "Please speak softly around llamas. They have opinions and reach." On the anniversary of the failed sale, I hosted a zoo birthday. We hung bunting. The teenagers painted a mural of Scone that looked more like a politician than a donkey, but he didn't mind. The paper ran a feature with a headline that used the word beloved, which made me cry into the dishwater. Mark came late, alone, his face a study in caution. He stood at the far edge of the picnic tables and watched a boy coax a rabbit out of a shy corner with gentleness that should be bottled and sold as a solution to wars. "You won," he said, finally stepping closer. "It wasn't a contest," I said, and meant it. "I made it one," he said. "You did." He looked at the windmill, which made a pleasant whisper like a secret kept. "Mira doesn't understand this," he said. "I don't know if she wants to." "She doesn't have to," I said. "But you do." "I'm trying," he said. "Good," I said. "There's a difference between building and buying." He came the next Saturday and the next. On the 3rd, he brought Hannah, who wore her headphones like armor and carried a sketchbook thick with horses she had never met. Sheriff posed for her with exaggerated dignity as if he had always known his profile belonged on paper. She drew fast and precise. When she finished, she turned shyly and handed me a small portrait of Scone with eyelashes like a film star. I pinned it in the office between the clipboards and the list of grain deliveries. We paid her in lemonade and pride and a promise to hang the next one by the gate. When summer stretched itself thin and hot, the county clerk called to say a grant had come through for shade trees. We planted cottonwoods along the fence with a ceremony that included 3 shovels, 2 toddlers as foremen, and one prayer I said to the part of the sky where my husband had always looked when he needed to think. Mark read the plaque aloud, in memory of those who loved this place when no one else saw it. He did not say anything after that. He didn't have to. We added rabbits and 2 peacocks who liked to patrol like jewel-colored senators. We trained a teenager with a gentle voice to host the twilight tours where the bats lace the air and the owls become punctuation in the dusk. We wrote safety rules in fonts big enough for impatience. We built a hand-washing station that made children feel they were rubbing sticks together to make fire instead of washing away goat kisses. We learned exactly how many carrots a donkey can eat before he begins to believe he is the mayor. In late September, a letter arrived from a law firm whose stationery carried the smell of confidence. They proposed a land swap. We would receive acreage farther out near a highway. They would receive our 42 acres plus a promise not to tell the newspaper how perfectly everything had worked out for them. I put the letter under the leg of a table that had always wobbled and considered whether I might feel sorry for people who believed everything important could be traded. I did not. That fall, we hosted the first harvest afternoon, which consisted of exactly 3 things: pie, hayrides, and patience for the parents who wanted the photos to turn out a certain way instead of the way the day turned out. The medical clinic sent a nurse with a basket of sunscreen. The bakery donated pies with edges that tasted like secrets. The librarian read a book about a girl who loved an old place so much people started loving it with her. Mark stood by the gate with a counter clicking in his hand, tracking how many people came through as if measuring joy could help him believe in it. He brought a clipboard the next week with a list of improvements to parking and a diagram for traffic flow that looked like a dance. One evening after we put the animals to bed, yes, animals go to bed, yes, they complain about bedtime like children, I found him in the tack room with his father's hat in his hands. He put it on and it didn't fit, and he took it off and set it down as if it might break. I didn't come out here much after I left, he said. I know, I said. I thought it would make me small again, he said. I wanted to feel big. It makes me the right size, I said. He nodded like the right size was a concept he had been searching for and only now had found. We were not finished with trouble. Success attracts the kind of attention that wants to sit at your table and then tell you where the forks go. A man with a smile that slid arrived to propose a brand partnership that involved a cartoon donkey on bags of snack food with more sugar than sense. I told him Scone would prefer not to endorse anything that makes children bounce into fences. He emailed 3 times. I didn't answer. When someone offers to make you famous, ask whether you can still hear yourself think with the noise turned up. Winter came soft and bright. We strung lights along the barn roof and held cocoa nights where people discovered the rare pleasure of standing quietly together in cold air while animal breath made halos. Mark found me one of those nights at the edge of the pasture, my hands in my coat pockets, my heart working like a reliable engine in a car you never trade in. I paid the last installment, he said. With the 2%. You could have held back the interest, I said. I didn't need it. I did, he said. He exhaled and the breath lit the air. I told Mira I wasn't selling again. Not anything that isn't mine. How did that go? I asked, because I am a mother, but I am also not a fool. We're talking, he said carefully. I told her I need this place. She asked if it needs me. I said it does. He grinned, sudden and sheepish. You do, right? I need someone to scrub water tubs who can do it without turning his socks into a lawsuit, I said. I need someone to hold a gate. I need someone to remind me I can ask for help. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I didn't open it until later at the kitchen table with the blue mug and a slice of apple cake. Inside was a note in his square, careful print. Thank you for making me pay the penalty, so I would learn what costs and what's priceless. There was a receipt for a donation to the Sanctuary Fund in an amount that made me put my hands flat on the table, because sometimes good things feel like wind. At the bottom he had drawn a goat that looked like a potato with horns. It made me laugh out loud in a room empty except for the wind and a hat. The mini-zoo became what I had dreamed and something I hadn't. A place where the stories people carried in their pockets finally met air. A man who delivered packages confessed one Tuesday that he came early to stand by the fence and breathe because his day was a string pulled too tight. A woman who kept books at the school brought a child who had decided his voice was dangerous and watched him whisper to a rabbit and watched the rabbit lean into the sound like sunlight. The nurse from the clinic told me she sends patients to walk our loop between the cottonwoods and the windmill as if oxygen had a shortcut through leaves. In spring, the cottonwoods we planted were tall enough to make a statement and humble enough to still need stakes. The zoo turned too. The peacocks learned how to time their train to the camera shutter. We installed a bell by the gate, not for emergencies, but for gratitude, a little ring people could give when they had seen something worth promising to themselves to remember. It rang so often the goats started treating it like a dinner bell, which was fine because hope should make you hungry. If you had come on any of those Saturdays, you would have seen a woman with gray hair and a stapler in her back pocket standing by the pepper tree, and a man her age sweeping the aisle with a broom whose handle had forgotten anyone else's grip, and a girl with headphones leaning over a sketchbook making a donkey immortal. You would have heard the windmill clicking into its rhythm and the soft roar of 1,000 small lives continuing. You would have passed a sign at the gate that reads, "Leave your loud here. Bring your questions in." And maybe, if your timing was right, you would have caught the twilight tour where the bats lace the sky and the children learn to keep their mouths shut just long enough to hear the owls ask and answer their ancient, reasonable questions. People sometimes ask me now, in that tone that tries to make a compliment out of surprise, how I managed it at my age. I tell them the truth. I did not do it at my age. I did it at my husband's age of 30 when we bought a hat and a windmill and a promise. I did it at my son's age of 8 when he fell off the mare and climbed back on because I would not let him turn the word fall into the word fail. I did it at my granddaughter's age of 13 when she told her father she was volunteering on Saturdays whether or not he could think of anything more impressive to put on a college application. I did it at every age I have ever been, because a woman is not a single point in time. She is a braid. Some days I walk out before dawn and stand under the pepper tree with a cup I do not drink and say my husband's name out loud until the syllables sit in my mouth like bread. On those mornings the east turns pink and the windmill turns honest, and I feel the rush of the day about to begin, the animals about to insist on their breakfast, the children about to clatter down the road with apple slices and wonder, and I think, we didn't win, we kept. We kept what mattered. We turned a penalty into a pledge. We turned a sale into a sanctuary. We turned a son into a man who knows where page 13 lives and why you read it first. Once, late on a Wednesday, when the last school bus had sighed away and the last volunteer had waved from a pickup with a bed full of good intentions, I saw a car I recognized from too many city curbs. The tire company's representative stepped out in shoes that had never met mud. He stood by the gate and asked if he could look. "You can look," I said, "because I am not a dragon and this is not a horde." He put his hands in his pockets and took it all in, the goats, the llama with opinions, the hand-painted signs, the children's drawings, clothes pinned along the fence like flags from a country where kindness has borders worth defending. He nodded once, not at me but at the idea, and got back in his car and left without taking a single photograph to feed into a slide deck. I liked him then, just a little, because he had the sense to understand that not every good thing needs to be measured to count. If you're waiting for the part where my son stands on a hay bale and delivers an apology monologue, I will disappoint you. Life is less theatrical and more stubborn than stories. He says he is sorry in installments. He brings donuts for the volunteers and wipes tables without being asked and sits quietly with a child who would rather not speak to anyone taller than a fence post. He fixes the latch before I can notice it needs fixing. He pays attention. It turns out attention is interest too. 2% and then some. I have been tempted, in the telling, to sand down the barbs, to make myself a more patient woman, to make him a more obvious villain. To take out the parts where I doubted and the parts where he tried and the hours we both spent in silence polishing stubbornness into something like grace. But the truth is more useful than a tidy ending. I did not save the ranch because I am extraordinary. I saved it because I am ordinary and tired of being asked to move aside. I use tools anyone can find. A clerk's window, a pen, a neighbor's number, a willingness to say "I'll" with my whole chest. I stapled forms and I stapled a life together, and I kept stapling even when my hands ached. If there is any magic in what happened, it is the kind of magic you make when you put your boots on and step outside. Sometimes a teenager on the tour will ask me at the very end, when the sky is the color of a secret, whether it hurt to make my son pay. Yes, I say, because I won't lie to a child. It hurt the way physical therapy hurts. It hurt like a broken bone remembering its shape. They nod as if their knees have known that kind of truth on soccer fields. I tell them we are all capable of both the wound and the salve. I tell them some payments are not punishments, but bridges. I tell them I will let them ring the bell by the gate if they promise to come back. There are photographs now in the little office, my husband with a hat that sits on no head but holds all of them, my son on a ladder fixing a blade with an expression of someone who is not afraid to be smaller than the sky, my granddaughter's drawing of scone with eyelashes for days, and a snapshot a reporter took of me the afternoon the SUVs arrived and the town arrived louder. In it, I am not smiling. I am not frowning. I am looking at a clipboard with the face of a woman who has decided to set her jaw in a way that will keep a promise from falling out of her mouth. It is not a glamorous picture. It is better. It is a woman being useful to the thing she loves. The pepper tree keeps making shade like poems. The windmill keeps complaining only when it needs to. The goats keep training us to be more careful with latches. The llamas keep disapproving in a way that makes me feel improved. The rabbits keep teaching shy children how to move their hands like invitations. The owls keep refusing to be fed by anyone who hasn't learned the discipline of wonder. And Sheriff, who begins every day with a plan for mischief and ends every day with hay in his beard like a badge of honor, keeps reminding me that leadership is sometimes just walking toward a thing confidently and hoping the fence line meets you halfway. If you come one Saturday, maybe you already have, maybe you plan to, maybe you are someone who drove past, slowed down, and promised yourself one day you will find me by the gate. I will stamp your hand with a raccoon whose ringtail prints just right. I will remind you not to feed the owls no matter how convincingly they negotiate. I will point at the windmill and the shade and the stretch of land that looks nothing like a sales brochure and everything like a story. And when you are halfway back to your car, with hay in your hair and dust on your shoes and a carrot stub in your pocket you forgot to hand out, you might look back and see a woman standing under a tree while a man sweeps the aisle and a donkey brays a note that sounds like a benediction. You do not have to say anything. Instead, you can know what I know. The ranch kept its promise to itself, and so did we. We did not sell value to prove value. We did not punish to be cruel. We paid what love cost and found it affordable. The stapler is still in my pocket. I do not need it as often as I did that first week, but I keep it anyway. A little metal reminder that some things are held together with nails and some with ink and some with the steady pressure of a woman who refuses to be edited out of her own life. I sleep better now. Not because the world is less noisy, but because I am more certain. If you ask me where certainty comes from, I will tell you. From page 13, from a clerk who knows your name, from a goat who will steal your sandwich if you do not guard it, from a son who shows up even when it would be easier to explain why he cannot.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video, like and subscribe. Bye bye!